The Rambam discusses a well-known halacha about the person who can either afford Shabbos or Chanukah candles and how they have to prioritize Shabbos candles. In the way the Rambam teaches us this particular halacha, he actually teaches us everything that we need to know about what Judaism is all about and why we learn this specifically in the context of Chanukah. What is Judaism about? Shalom, not peace in the conventional sense, but peace in the ultimate sense. So it starts off with Simchas Chanukah. At the end of the laws of Chanukah, Zok the Rambam, where the Rambam tells us, Hoye lefond of ner beisav and ner Chanukah, if a person has a dilemma between either affording Shabbos candles or Chanukah candles, alternatively, or the debate whether a person can afford Kiddush wine or Shabbos candles, ner beisoy koidem. The halacha is Shabbos candles take precedence. And then he tells us why. Mishum shalom beisoy, because the reason you light candles on Shabbos is for shalom bayis, which is basically that it's a pleasurable experience and nobody's bumping into the furniture. And then he proves how important shalom bayis or shalom generally is. Sharei Hashem nimchak la'aseh shalom ben ish le'ishto, because we see in the case of a soita that we are allowed to obliterate, to erase Hashem's name in order to bring peace between a husband and wife where there's conflict in their home. And then he says beyond that, Godol HaShalom. Shalom, peace is so great that the entire reason the Torah was given was to bring peace into the world. Shnema, as the Pasuk says, Shalom, its ways are the ways of pleasantness and all of its pathways are peace. Where does the Rambam get this from? The Makah from the Halachas in Masechta Shabbos. It comes from the Gemara Shabbos. Except there's one difference between the language used by the Gemara Shabbos and the language of the Rambam, and that is Abadot State Nor Ner Beisai Odif Mishlum Shalom Beisai. So there the Gemara just says that the Shabbos candles are preferential to the Chanukah candles and doesn't go into the whole conversation about how important peace is as a value in Judaism. So therefore, we have to wonder then, was is machriach dem Rambam zum Aufse seiner Reihe, Sharei Hashem nimchek lasei shalom chulei. Why does the Rambam feel it necessary to prove to us how important peace is by showing us the case of the Sota where we erase Hashem's name for the sake of peace when the Gemara did not feel that was necessary? And the truth is that we even need to understand beyond that, because even after the Rambam has brought that particular proof that look how important peace is, we can erase Hashem's name, is in addition to that, the Rambam gives us this broad-based statement, Godol HaShalom Shekol HaTorah Nitnu Chulei, that peace is so great the entire Torah was given for the sake of peace. Why is that relevant over here? Why does the Rambam have to mention it? And don't say it's just because V'doicha Godol Loimar. It's a bit of a stretch to say, because the Rambam wanted to end, this is the end of the laws of Chanukah, he wants to end on a positive note. As the time was the Rambam is most of that the reason the Rambam adds this overarching message that peace is important, the whole purpose of Torah is peace, is gedei l'sayim b'davar tov, because the Rambam wants to end on a positive note, as we typically try to do throughout all areas of Torah. Because if he had concluded just simply with the notion of bringing peace between a husband and wife who are in conflict, that in itself would be a positive way to end the halachas of Chanukah. And even if you want to suggest, well, the fact is you're erasing Hashem's name, and maybe that's not such a positive concept, fine. The Rambam could have presented what he was saying in a slightly different order, so that the very last thing we would learn about would not be the erasing of Hashem's name, but rather would be the fact that you prioritize Shabbos candles over Chanukah candles. So you can't say that he introduced this principle of Godol HaShalom, that peace is a great principle of Judaism, just simply to end on a positive note. So we need to understand why. Clearly, the principle of peace is extremely relevant in this particular conversation. Now, there are other details about how the Rambam presents us that we need to understand. First of all, Aleph Di'etzem Raya. The Rambam is trying to prove to us that Shabbos candles, which bring peace to our home, override Chanukah candles. What's his proof? From a dramatic story of saving a marriage. Surely what the Rambam wants to do is to show us how important peace is by telling us, look, you even erase Hashem's name, to tell us dem goydem ma'alas hashalom, tell us how important peace is. As it says, because look how important peace is. It even overrides such a cardinal element of Judaism, of Torah mitzvahs. Mechikas Hashem, the thought of erasing Hashem's name. Is mikol shekain as ner beis is doich ner Chanukah. So if we can override the prohibition against erasing Hashem's name, how much more so we can override Chanukah candles in favor of Shabbos candles? Surely that's what the Rambam's trying to tell us, right? But the proof does not match with the principle. The proof he's bringing is to bring peace between a husband and wife who are in conflict, where he suspects of infidelity. There, their objective is to allow a woman to still remain married to her husband. And that's got far-reaching effects. It's something that affects a family, and it's something that affects the divine presence being in the space. We also know that when a couple gets divorced, the Mizbeach cries, so we want to avoid that. There are huge issues at stake over here. When you consider all of those serious considerations, God forbid the possibility of destroying a family and pushing away the Shekhinah and the Mizbeach crying, so all of that collectively, okay, will erase Hashem's name to preserve Shalom in such a scenario. Mashengen de Shalom Baye is by Ner Beisai, but the peace that Shabbos candles brings, as the Gemara tells us, is just that people don't bump into furniture or trip. Or the other opinion, which is that it's not enjoyable to sit at a Shabbos meal in the dark. Just because we're willing to override a mitzvah for a very powerful kind of peace, how do we know that for a lesser kind of peace we will override the mitzvah of Chanukah? Especially when you consider that Ner Chanukah is not just a mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah that publicizes the Eibishter's greatness through publicizing the miracle of Chanukah. So how do we know that Soita is a viable proof for our conversation? Second question we have to work out is, in the Etzim Din is the Rambam Katzah Meshana from L'Sheina Gemara, the way the Rambam presents this halacha is different and even abridged from how the Gemara does. Aleph, in Gemara is dos in Tzvei Fallen. The Gemara splits it into two sections. Ner Beis and Ner Chanukah, if there is the debate between Shabbos or Chanukah candles, Ner Beis, Adav Mishum Shlei Beis. Then the Shabbos candles take precedence because of Shalom Bayis. Ner Beis of Kiddush Hayom, separate principle. If there's now a question of whether you buy Kiddush wine or Shabbos candles, then Ner Beis Adav Mishum Shlei Beis. Again, the Gemara says you prioritize the Shabbos candles because of the peace in the home. On the Rambam is a better kodelan name bava. The Rambam doesn't do that. He gives it all one consideration. If it's either Chanukah candles or Kiddush Hayom, Shabbos candles take precedence. Why does he summarize in that way? And also, Beis, the Lashon HaGemara is Ner Beisai Odif. The Gemara says it's because Shabbos candles are they are a priority over Chanukah candles. And the Rambam is Meshan Rashayb Ner Beisai Koidem. The Rambam only says Shabbos candles come before Chanukah candles. It doesn't necessarily say that they take precedence over Chanukah candles. Why that nuanced difference? So in order to understand this, let's pay attention to where the Rambam has chosen to discuss this particular area of halacha. It also seems to be misplaced. In order to understand this, we first introduce an analysis of the Rambam's presentation. We know very well that where the Rambam chooses to present a particular halacha or halachos is very precise. Which raises the question, why did the Rambam stick this halacha as Ner Beis says that Shabbos candles override Chanukah candles in Hilches Chanukah and nicht in Hilches Shabbos? Why does he put that into the laws of Chanukah, not into the laws of Shabbos, where you would expect it? You're telling me how great Shabbos candles are. Why didn't you tell me that in the halachas where you're speaking about Shabbos candles? Yes, you'll say, because it's a law that doesn't apply every single Shabbos, and obviously the halachas of Shabbos candles must be relevant every Shabbos. No, but Shabbos Chanukah, it's only going to be relevant once a year on Shabbos Chanukah, perhaps twice a year, which happens when you have two Shabbosim in Chanukah. It's the Sabar Adin with the Adgosh and Achroy is Ner Shabbos, as the Imaida for Ner Beis Shabbos couldn't Ner Chanukah. But the whole message and the theme is about the greatness and priority of Shabbos candles. If you're talking about the greatness of Shabbos candles, surely the place to discuss the greatness of Shabbos candles should be in the halachas of Shabbos. Now, if you think about it, the question is even greater when you consider we also talk about Kiddush. Here the Rambam's talking about Shabbos candles compared to Kiddush wine. What has that to do with Chanukah? That has got no relevance to the laws of Chanukah. Now, bloß Hilchos Shabbos. It's only relevant in Hilchos Shabbos. Ostensibly, the only reason the Rambam is mentioning it here is because he's already talking about Shabbos candles versus Chanukah candles. Logic says the entire conversation with both aspects, the Kiddush wine and the Chanukah candles versus the Shabbos candles, all of that belongs far better in the halachas of Shabbos. And not only that, that's actually how others do it. Nochmer, in Torah v'Shulchan Aruch gefällt man Taka dem Din, as ner Shabbos is koidem lener Chanukah. Look in the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch where they talk about the fact that you prioritize Shabbos candles over Chanukah candles. In Beida Erta Sein Lechas Shabbos and Sein Lechas Chanukah. They bring it in both places. Why does the Rambam only bring it in Hilchas Chanukah? Now, if you're familiar with the Rambam, you'll know the Rambam doesn't typically repeat the same halacha in two different places. That's fine. Like the Rambam tells us the principles of how halacha works, as ein derech is the first dvarav v'makom echad soisem dvarav, that the commentators on the Rambam point out that it's typical of the Rambam to express something clearly in one area of halacha and then leave it in a different area because you'll rely on what he has already taught you. Well, in that case, the Rambam's style is to rely on what he has already previously taught, which is not the case in Shulchan Aruch, and halachas are sometimes repeated. Like, for example, in our case of the laws of Shabbos candles versus Chanukah candles, we see that the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch quote that both in the laws of Shabbos and both in the laws of Chanukah, but that's not the Rambam's approach. Now, parenthetically, we're going to just quickly distinguish between the nature of Rambam and the nature of Shulchan Aruch, and then we'll come back to the point. Perhaps the reason is Shulchan Aruch is kishmoi keinhu. Shulchan Aruch is designed to be, like the name indicates, zugegreite dinim, laws that are easy access, prepared for you. That whenever you happen to encounter a particular question, that's where you'll find it in the Shulchan Aruch. So if the question comes up on a Shabbos, you'll be looking in Hilchas Shabbos. If the question will come up on Chanukah, you'll be looking in Hilchas Chanukah. So Shulchan Aruch, which wants to be like the quickest way to find halacha as and when you need it, you can expect to find the same halacha mentioned more than once so that you have easy access. That's Shulchan Aruch. But as it has been done, warum der Din is as im ein yodem asegas liknes ner Shabbos v'ner Chanukah. So here's our example. The question of whether a person can't afford both their Shabbos and the Chanukah candles is negel ma'aser b'peil sayin ilchas Shabbos und sayin ilchas Chanukah. That's something which could be relevant to the laws of Shabbos. It could be relevant to the laws of Chanukah. So the Shulchan Aruch will put them in both places. The Rambam's not intended for that. Mashenkin the Sefer Hayad von Rambam. The Rambam tells us in his own introduction to Mishnah Torah that his goal is to have a compilation that brings together all of the details of Torah Sheba'al Peh, that a person could read first the whole of Torah Shebechsav, and then read the Mishnah Torah and get the overview to know everything that Torah Sheba'al Peh has to teach, without need to read any other book in the interim. As the Kavon in sein Sefer is zu wissen Dinei HaTorah. So therefore the Rambam tells us the purpose of Mishnah Torah is not to have an easy access as and when you need the halachas reference book like Shulchan Aruch, but rather it's an encyclopedia of Jewish law that you can consult and get the overview and an insight to the whole of Jewish law. So if you already know something in Jewish law because you've already learnt it, there would be no reason in the Rambam's objective to repeat what you already know, because the purpose of this book is so that you know. So then you could ask, the Rambam surely doesn't have to repeat the same information both in the laws of Shabbos and in the laws of Chanukah, but the order is wrong. We can't apply this logic that the Rambam only says something once and doesn't repeat it to our case. That the Rambam typically explains something once and then relies on it. Because if that were the case, the Rambam should have discussed this in Hilchos Shabbos, which appear first in Mishnah Torah. That's where you first encounter the dilemma of the Shabbos versus the Chanukah candles. Speak about it there, and don't have to speak about it in Hilchos Chanukah. But he does it the wrong way around, at least according to this logic. Especially when, as we've already mentioned, the fact that the Shabbos candles override the Chanukah candles highlights the power and value of Shabbos candles, which lends it to be a conversation in the halachas of Shabbos. Why does the Rambam discuss this in the laws of Chanukah? Once we understand that, we'll be able to understand the other details. So therefore, the explanation goes like this. Let's understand, why do you light Shabbos candles at all? Zog the Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos. Go look at how the Rambam describes Shabbos candles in the halachas of Shabbos, the first reference to Shabbos candles. There he doesn't tell us that's because of Shalom Bayis. As das is b'chlal oinek Shabbos unichvoid Shabbos. There he says you light Shabbos candles because it adds pleasure and honor to Shabbos. He doesn't say anything about Shalom Bayis. To, as the Gemara says, avoid bumping into furniture or tripping. Or the other opinion that it's not pleasant to eat your meal in the dark. The Rambam does not raise that in Hilchos Shabbos. Interesting. So in Hilchos Shabbos, what's the position? Why do you light Shabbos candles? For the honor and pleasure of Shabbos. Now, surely that is incredibly perplexing. Once we reach Hilchos Chanukah, we discover that the Rambam's view is, as Ner Shabbos is in Yonah Shloim Beisoi, that the reason you prioritize Shabbos candles over Chanukah candles is because Shabbos candles represent peace in the home. Surely, if that's what the Rambam believes, he should have told it to us when he introduced the halachas of Shabbos candles first time around. Unless we're misunderstanding this. As therefore move on, we obviously haven't understood properly. As late in the Rambam is the etzem achiyuv for Ner Shabbos. The Rambam is showing us that the fundamental reason you light Shabbos candles is nit tzulib shalom bayis. The primary reason to light Shabbos candles is not for peace in the home, not tzulib kavod v'oinik, but because of the honor and pleasure of Shabbos. That's the primary reason. Now the reality is, having lights in your house will add to the peace in your home on Shabbos, because people won't bump into the walls and they will enjoy the meal. But this is not the parameters or the reason why you light Shabbos candles. If that is true, that the primary reason to light Shabbos candles is out of honor of Shabbos, then we've got to understand why then does the Rambam subsequently say the reason that you pay for your Shabbos candles instead of your Chanukah candles is because of Shalom Bayis? Shalom Bayis is doch nicht der Geder HaChiyuv HaMitzvah. The Rambam says that's not even part of the mitzvah. So how's he using it as the reason why the Shabbos candles take precedence over the Chanukah candles? To answer that question, that is why the Rambam brings these halachas, not in the laws of Shabbos, because the laws of Shabbos focus on how Shabbos candles honor Shabbos and bring pleasure to Shabbos. There's another subject to be discussed in Hilchos Chanukah. What is that? And not only is it a different halacha, but to illustrate his point, the Rambam will quote the idea that you erase Hashem's name in the case of the Soita. Using this information, the Rambam innovates an insight for us. The fact that Shabbos candles take priority over Chanukah candles because of Shalom Bayis is and here is the kicker, nita geder in Ner Shabbos, is not a detail of the laws of Shabbos candles. As in them, it's not telling us that because peace is a theme of Shabbos candles, therefore Shabbos candles are greater than Chanukah candles, and therefore they push Chanukah candles aside. The Rambam's not saying that, because the Rambam is clear that peace is not the primary reason you have Shabbos candles. So why then do you defer your Chanukah candles to Shabbos candles? Because generally, across Judaism, anything that has to do with peace takes priority over any other consideration. So therefore, if one mitzvah gets displaced because of the mitzvah or because of the principle of shalom, it's not that mitzvah A has the power to push aside mitzvah B. Shabbos candles are so important, they push aside Chanukah candles, which are perhaps less important. No, that's not the message. It's rather that you actually now fulfill part of what Chanukah candles are all about by lighting Shabbos candles. We'll explain this in greater detail, but the principle is, by deferring the Chanukah candles, you're actually celebrating the Chanukah candles, and the Shabbos candles are showing you that celebration. Okay, let's understand how that works. The principle that the Rambam teaches, that you put the Shabbos candles first because of the principle of Shalom Bayis, is not only detail about Shabbos candles. The fact that Shalom takes precedence is part of the Chanukah message too. Why? Because Chanukah is vasatel from kol haTorah shenitna shalom. Because as the Rambam tells us, the whole of Torah is here to bring peace to the world. Chanukah is part of Torah. Therefore, Chanukah's objective is also to bring peace to the world. That's why the Rambam Dafka has this conversation in the halachas of Chanukah, so that you'd be clear, we're not discussing over here the displacement of Chanukah in favor of Shabbos. But rather to show us that Chanukah itself is this message. In other words, if in the laws of Shabbos we were told that Shabbos candles override Chanukah candles, we'd say, aha, that tells you Shabbos candles are so powerful, they override Chanukah candles. Because the Rambam does not do that, and instead he says, in the laws of Chanukah, this is how you celebrate Chanukah in these circumstances, where a person cannot afford both his Shabbos and Chanukah candles. He prioritizes his Shabbos candles. That's how Chanukah is celebrated in those circumstances in the best way possible. Why? Because Chanukah wants to bring peace to the world, and in this situation, peace is illustrated by the Shabbos candles over the Chanukah candles. And if them bring to a raya from them, and in order to prove that point, he quotes that we're allowed to erase Hashem's name to bring peace in a marriage, because Shalom is nit nora zay grois as slibdem is mendechet dem haben ism fun mechikas Hashem. Not just that you're not allowed to erase Hashem's name, but there's a crisis over here in this marriage, so we'll have to unfortunately erase Hashem's name to deal with the crisis. It's much more than that. This is a scenario where we deliberately, intentionally write Hashem's name with the sole purpose of erasing it in order to bring peace. In other words, here you've got the mitzvah of writing Hashem's name with all of its power, with all of its holiness, all for the purpose that it should be erased, so that there should be peace in this family. That's what the Rambam wants to show us. The principles of Torah are that Torah is constructed to bring peace into the world. Sometimes you bring peace by removing something. In that case, you're removing Hashem's name. In this case, you're removing the Chanukah lights. That's why the Rambam says that the Shabbos candles come before And that's different. Beshinun from L'Shein HaGemara Ner Beisai Odif, completely different to the language of the Gemara, which said that the Shabbos candles take priority over. Priority implies that there's something that the Shabbos candles have that Chanukah candles don't have. The Rambam doesn't want to say that. Odif can get touched there and use the word Odif in the Gemara. You could explain it as the mitzvah ner Shabbos ot adifus legabe de tzveite ner Chanukah. The implication would be that the Shabbos candles have a fundamental edge over the Chanukah candles. Which then allows us that Shabbos candles should push away Chanukah candles. The Rambam does not want to convey that message. It's the Rambam medayek as odif domain blois koidem. The Rambam wants us to understand, don't misunderstand the Gemara's use of the word odif. Don't think the Gemara intended odif to mean that Shabbos candles are more powerful than Chanukah candles. Rather, that Shabbos candles in this scenario come first before Chanukah candles. The Gemara meint mit dem bloß sagen, then all the Gemara wants to tell us is, as in Adloka befoil, when it comes to actually choosing which to light, when a hot norif einer von saying he can only afford one of them, is ner beisei koidem, you put the Shabbos candles first. Why do you put them first? Because that way Chanukah candles actually still achieve their purpose. Let's understand that better. As wenn es sich wegen Shalom, when we discuss the principle of Shalom, is es nicht beäufen als ein Mitzvah ve'isur, wird nicht durch der Adifus von der zweiten Mitzvah ve'isur. Shalom does not mean one mitzvah is overridden by another more important or more powerful mitzvah or restriction. Now, das is matim euch mit dem Teichen von der zweiten Mitzvah. Rather, Shalom means if I have to defer mitzvah A in favor of mitzvah B, it's because that will convey mitzvah A's purpose. Is the Rambam Mamshech on Masber, which the Rambam explains by telling us, the greatness of peace is that it is the central theme of the whole of Torah. It's not only the theme of Shabbos candles, it is equally the theme of Chanukah candles. Which means, considering that the entire Torah, which means every single mitzvah, is designed and intended to bring peace into our world, is verstandig. From that we can appreciate, if I have a choice between two mitzvahs, one of which is clearly related to the principle of peace, then that mitzvah which represents peace can never displace another mitzvah from the mitzvah Torah or the Rabbanan, whether the other mitzvah is a Torah or rabbinic mitzvah. The moment I perform a mitzvah that actually actively generates peace in the world, that actually also fulfills what the other mitzvah was intended for. I'm not pushing away the other mitzvah. We're doing what the other mitzvah was intended for. Why are there Chanukah candles? To bring peace to the world. Why are there Shabbos candles? To bring peace to the world. If I have to choose between the two of them, well, Shabbos candles show me the peace in an obvious way. So that's going to celebrate both Shabbos and Chanukah by lighting the Shabbos candles. That's why the Rambam brings both things as the fact that the Rambam talks about the advantage of Shabbos candles not only over Chanukah candles but also over Kiddush. He brings it into one conversation, unlike the Gemara that split it into two separate halachas. Because the Rambam wants to be clear to us that there are not two separate topics under discussion over here. As ner beisei is Aleph deiche ner Chanukah beis deiche Kiddush Hayoim, that you shouldn't think Shabbos candles, one topic is they override Chanukah candles, and a separate topic is they override Kiddush wine. Now, das is einun derselbe din. The Rambam wants to tell us it's one message, one theme, one principle in Judaism. That principle is v'bald as shalom is klolus kavanas nesinas haTorah v'chol mitzveiseha kol haTorah, because the objective of peace is the common theme of the whole of Torah and every mitzvah. Kelol oich ner Chanukah ve'kiddush hayom, which includes Chanukah candles and Kiddush wine. Is that tzad hashavesh ben mechayiv the gedima for ner beisai. That common theme that runs through every single mitzvah is the singular reason why, in all circumstances where Shabbos candles that clearly represent the theme of peace are up against any other mitzvah, Shabbos candles will have to take priority. Now let's take this deep and understand, yes, this is now a principle we understand that applies to the whole of Judaism, that no matter what scenario it is, every single mitzvah, every single component of Torah is the theme of Shalom. Why would this be expressed specifically in the halachas of Chanukah? Well, Chanukah is not nur a prat in Kol HaTorah, was nicht nur das Shalom Ba'olam, because Chanukah is not just a singular mitzvah within the whole ocean of Torah, which is all about bringing peace to the world. No, Chanukah is shaykh to Kol HaTorah, but the nature of Chanukah is that Chanukah celebrates the whole of Judaism, the whole of Torah. And the Rambam tells that to us right in the beginning of his introduction to the halachas of Chanukah. But the Rambam is Meirech Enonav V'Hilchas Chanukah. And by the way, this is interesting because the Rambam's Mishnah Torah is not a book of history. So the fact that he starts Hilchas Chanukah with a whole historical account of what occurred means that that information is relevant to understanding the halachas of Chanukah. He gives us the backstory to why we have Chanukah in the first place. And he says, but by Yisheni was in the Second Temple era, when the Hellenists attacked the Jewish people, Gozu Gezeres al Yisrael, made decrees against the Jewish people, V'batlu dosam, and they wanted to neutralize their observance. And they wouldn't allow us to study Torah and perform mitzvahs. So it is an affront to Kol HaTorah. Told Eibishter had Rachmanas on us and saved us. And therefore the great sages of that time instituted Chanukah as an 8-day holiday to celebrate the miracles. Based on how the Rambam's telling us das haste, as Teuchen in Yonah von Chanukah, that the theme of Chanukah besteht nicht nur in dem, was sie kommt durch Ha'ma'ura Mesuyam. It's not just that there was a great miracle associated with a particular incident, on had mitzvahs protius, which therefore causes us to have specific mitzvahs like lighting a menorah and saying Hallel, v'shar hayamim tovim v'hamitzvahs shemidrabanan odom min haTorah, which would be the same pretty much as any other mitzvah, whether it be deraisa or derabanan. The Rambam wants us to know nochmer. Something much more fundamental occurred on Chanukah, which is Chanukah was when we were saved from far-reaching decrees against Judaism, von ganzen das Yisrael, against the entire Jewish observance, and klolus eisek haTorah v'mitzvahs, and the entire observance of Torah mitzvahs. Therefore, if you want to say that Torah is lases Shalom Ba'olam, this is a holiday that represents Kol HaTorah, so therefore this is a holiday that must represent Shalom. Now we can see that the relationship between the fact that you prioritize Shabbos candles, specifically mentioned in the halachas of Chanukah, nor mitzad hashaychus v'malyas hashalom to Kol HaTorah, is related to the idea that Chanukah is this message of the entire Torah, and the whole of Torah is about Shalom. Says Novas Chanukah is a tel from Kol HaTorah canal, and Chanukah is part of the whole of Torah. It's not just that. The fact that the Rambam goes to the extent of illustrating to us the importance of Shalom, not only in the unique debate between Shabbos candles and Chanukah candles, but rather that Kol HaTorah nitna l'aseh Shalom Ba'olam. Where does the Rambam discuss that? Specifically in the laws of Chanukah. Must be because the theme of Shalom is deeply rooted in the story and theme of Chanukah. Even beyond the fact that it's just the date that we saved the whole of Torah, and the whole of Torah is about peace. In order to understand what the uniqueness about Chanukah is, we're going to observe the difference between what Shabbos candles achieve and what Chanukah candles achieve. And we'll see that, in a sense, they're almost like two ends of a spectrum. So we'll understand it based on the following. If you take the whole of Torah mitzvahs, you can put them into two categories. Number one is the first of the Aseres HaDibros, which is Aseh, the positive mitzvahs, how we serve the Eibishter by things that we do proactively and positively. That's one aspect of Judaism. Then there's another aspect of Judaism represented by Lo Yeh L'Choy Elokim Acherim, the second of the Aseres HaDibros, and that's the principle of Lo Yiseseh, the mitzvahs we are not allowed to transgress. And that's all Ha'pe'ula von Shlila. How do we serve the Eibishter? By avoidance of doing something that's wrong. Generally speaking, positive mitzvahs align with anoichi. That's proactive, positive behavior that connects us to Hashem. And mitzvahs lo yisaseh are associated with lo yilacha, which is shlila, staying away from what we shouldn't do. That's generally speaking. Zayin mitzvahs d'Rabbanan aber, the 7 rabbinic laws of which Chanukah is one, zayin kulam bekum v'asei dafka, they're all proactive mitzvahs. The fascinating thing about them is, even though they're all positive mitzvahs, they're all designed to avoid and remove something negative, like washing your hands. With that in mind, we can distinguish between what Shabbos is all about and what Chanukah is all about. And here's where it gets really fascinating, because the actions of Shabbos seem to be desist, whereas the actions of Chanukah seem to be do, and yet the themes are the opposite. Shabbos is in an ofen von chiyuv. Shabbos is all about a positive, proactive action that we do. As the Rambam tells us right at the beginning of Hilchos Shabbos, Shabbos is primarily a positive mitzvah. What's the positive mitzvah? To desist from work. And he quotes the pasuk that says you have to rest on the 7th day. Even though the vast majority of mitzvahs associated with Shabbos are all loisesei, don'ts. Like the 39 categories of work that you may not perform on Shabbos. In spite of the fact that the parameters of Shabbos are defined by things you don't do, the theme of Shabbos is something you do. You rest. It's a positive action. Shviso menucha. From the inyan menucha b'Shabbos is nita inyan von heder, no inyan chiyuvi, because resting on Shabbos is not simply desisting from work. It's actually doing something proactive. And v'dosis b'tchilas habrei k'mayim razales given ha'olam choser. Like the Medrash tells us about the beginning of creation, the world was missing something. Bos Shabbos, bos menucha, something proactive was added to the recipe called the rest of Shabbos. In other words, Shabbos is not good enough just to say, I'm doing nothing, I'm going to sleep, I'm not going to work. No, the purpose of Shabbos is to be proactive, menucha, to be in a different state, a state of connection to the Eibishter and recognition that he controls the world. So the laws of Shabbos are mostly things you're not allowed to do. The theme of Shabbos is doing rest. Chanukah is almost the exact opposite. The Rambam is Marich V'Aschol Sichlas Chanukah Kanal, as we've quoted. The Rambam tells us right from the beginning, by way of introduction, what Chanukah is all about. That the Yevonim had decrees against us, or bitlu dosam, they interfered with our observance, and they wouldn't allow us to perform Torah mitzvahs, they put pressure on us. The response was that the Chashmonoim empowered themselves, and they got rid of the Yevonim. That means practically what they did was something which is negating. They got rid of the decrees. They got rid of the enemy. Removal, negative. How do we celebrate it? With things that appear to be positive. Joy, hallel, lighting candles. But the core principle and cause of Chanukah is the removal of the negative. So, Shabbos, the core principle of Shabbos is the doing of rest. The practical way you do it is stay away from all these things, many negative laws. The principle and theme of Chanukah is getting rid of the negative. What do we do in practice? Positive things, light candles and celebrate. With that information, we have a whole new insight into the distinction between Chanukah and Shabbos candles. The Geder von der Shabbos is Viklolus Inyan Shabbos. The whole purpose of Shabbos is positive, so the whole purpose of Shabbos candles is positive. Chiyuv, bring something proactively positive into your space. Oineg v'chula, as the Rambam writes in the laws of Shabbos, that Shabbos candles are there to show honor to Shabbos and bring pleasure to Shabbos. Was der Rebbe sagt der Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos, as ner Shabbos is einig v'chavod, Moisev sein in einig v'chavod. That's why the Rambam tells us in the laws of Shabbos that what are Shabbos candles about? Adding more pleasure, more honor. Practically, once you have those candles lit in your house, what is the practical experience that you have? Because the Shabbos candles are a light. Naturally, that pushes away obstacles or the possibility of a person having a non-enjoyable Shabbos, which is Shalom Bayis. It gets rid of the problem of people perhaps feeling uncomfortable to sit and eat in the dark. And it pushes away the possibility of people tripping or bumping into walls. Which is the exact opposite of Chanukah candles, where you're not permitted to use the Chanukah light for yourself. So what's the goal of Shabbos candles? Add to the value of Shabbos. What's the practical outcome of Shabbos candles? You get rid of problems and obstacles and disappointment. Ner Chanukah, now look at Chanukah candles by comparison. Why do we have Chanukah candles? Generate light into the world, radiate a message of Hashem's miracles into the world. That's something positive. And therefore you have to be so careful to light your Chanukah candles so that it will stimulate an opportunity for us to praise the Eibishter for his miracles. So it sounds so positive. But on the other hand, why do we light Chanukah candles? Is given you on a heder Shishler, because we got rid of problems. Because we got rid of those people who made decrees that didn't allow us to perform Torah mitzvahs. And the Eibishter saved us from their hands, and our chevra, the Chashmonoim, had the upper hand. We got rid of opposition, which is the principle of peace. Get rid of enemies brings peace. And that's actually something that you see in the candles themselves, as the Rambam tells us. We actually say it when we light the Chanukah candles. We say it. Why do we light these candles? To commemorate the salvation and the miracles. Und der Riber, wenn es kommt die Scheide von Beis, wenn Chanukah Beis, Kiddush Hayom, so now when you've got a toss-up between Shabbos candles or Chanukah candles, or for that matter, Shabbos candles and Kiddush wine, sagt Hilches Chanukah's ner Beis koidem. Where will you find the answer to how do you settle this dilemma? In the laws of Chanukah. And there you'll be told that Shabbos candles take priority. Why? Because as we have illustrated, Shabbos candles actually bring shalom to the home. Is von dem Moven as es wird durch ihm aufgetan dem Teichwind von Shalom mehr wie durch ner Chanukah. The fact that my house will be a more peaceful place with my Shabbos candles, that illustrates that Shabbos candles bring the theme of peace to the fore more than Chanukah candles. Kommt me mele ois, as mitzad halacha teichna alav von Chanukah gufes ner beisa koidem mishum shloim beisa. So therefore, even Chanukah candles themselves, because they're part of Torah, which is nitna l'aseh shalom ba'olam, and specifically Chanukah candles, which are to get rid of problems. That's the theme of Chanukah. Get rid of the menaged, get rid of the obstacles. Chanukah candles will say, well, if Shabbos candles are going to get rid of obstacles practically in my house, they should take precedence. So what's the theme? If you can get rid of the negative, that is the theme of Shalom. That's what Chanukah achieved. Shabbos candles right now is doing that more than Chanukah candles. Shabbos candles must go first. And the Rambam will prove that. If dem bringt der Rambam Eichocha v'raya, as das was in Shalom shlilas hamanagd is machir dem chiyuv tois kedusha. The concept of prioritizing getting rid of obstacles or opposition is a priority over just generating more light into the world. It's not in Prati and Chanukah. The Rambam will illustrate to us. It's not only something that's unique to Chanukah. It's a broad theme throughout the whole of Torah. How do I know? Because look, you can erase Hashem's name in order to get rid of conflict between a husband and wife. Again, what's the theme of Shalom? Removing the things that create conflict, obstacles, and discomfort, etc. Here we're dealing about the highest level of Hashem's name. Yud Kei Vav Kei Shem Havaya. Was is Shema Etzem, the name that represents Hashem's essence. Shema Mefoirash, the name that the Kohen Gadol would say explicitly only on Yom Kippur. V'Shema Meyuchad, the unique name of Hashem. And then you take that name. You don't just say it, you write it on actual parchment with actual ink. That means is das der herste Öfen and Amshachas ve'isafas HaKedusha ba'olam. That's like the most powerful way that you can bring Kedusha into the physical reality of the world. That is chiyuv. That is generating positive energy. That's shining a light. And yet here we have a scenario where you do all of that, write that name, and what's your whole intention? To erase it. Why? To bring peace between a husband and wife. Here's an illustration of where the entire purpose of adding more positive energy into the world is to achieve shalom, which is shlila, getting rid of something negative. It's only the period that there should not be the separation between a husband and wife. And then the Rambam is mamshach moisiv asbara bazeh. The Rambam explains it even more clearly for us. As val kol ater nitin las shalom ba'olam. He illustrates that the entire purpose of the whole of Torah is to bring peace into the world. Das was Torah nitna. That's the expression he uses. The Torah was given. What does given mean? Is gegeben geworden lamatin olam hazeh. Why was Torah put into our world? Like writing Hashem's name onto parchment, bringing light into the world, bringing the Eibishter's infinite wisdom and will into the world. Why? Is not simply to generate more light in our lowly world, nor lase shalom ba'olam, but to facilitate peace in our world. For shalom is notic nodod for sis da pir de machlokus medafes mevatel zayin. You only need shalom if there was conflict, if there was dispersion. Das heißt, in other words, kol Torah, ganz Torah, the whole of Torah, alle mitzvahs, including every mitzvah. Including those mitzvahs and areas of Torah that seem to be so much just about bringing more light and revelation and awareness into our world, is even in those elements of Torah, their actual true purpose is shalom ba'olam, to create peace in our world. To mevatel zayin dominion in olam vas is menaged to kedusha. Every part of Torah and every single mitzvah is primarily designed to remove the obstructions to godliness in the world. And we're going to take this deeper, because then we'll understand that actually that's how a Jewish person is supposed to see the world. Let's take it deeper. The Amitus und Shlemus von Shalom is the ultimate and truest form of peace is nicht nur das, was es wird bottelt, ist nagdus von Zweiten und es wird Shalom. True peace is not only we get rid of the opposition or the enemy or the obstacle to peace. Nor as es wird hamatzef, wenn es ist ibro häuf nito nit scheichke metzius funamenaget. Ultimate Shalom is there is no space for the possibility of an enemy. So you got two countries that are at war. Peace is not that you win the war. Peace is you reach a state where the enemy no longer wants to be your enemy. It would never be conceivable to be your enemy. Das heißt, in other words, als wird nicht gallen dem zweiten Metzies, als der zweite Metzies nicht im Lage, du wirst schlimmes Jöser. Nicht anders von seinem Metzies. What's the ultimate goal? That you're able to illustrate not only that the other one doesn't want to be your enemy, not only that the other one isn't your enemy, the ultimate shalom is that the other is not other, that we're all one. That's the goal of Torah. Not to neutralize opposition to Judaism or to Kedusha or to Eibishter, but to show that there is no such thing as opposition to Eibishter. And that's the real meaning of telling us that the Torah was given in order to bring peace into the world. As the emetz metzius from Veltes Torah elikus. The goal of Torah is not to neutralize opposition in the world, to obliterate klippa. The objective of Torah is to show that the world is elikus, always was elikus, can be nothing but elikus. Not just to show the world that without Eibishter you would never exist. As the Alter Rebbe explains in so much detail in Shar Yichud Vayimuna, that the Eibishter recreates the world from absolute nothing at every nanosecond. That's not the goal of Torah, just to show the world that you are completely dependent on the Eibishter, and how dare you rebel, and obviously you can't. The objective of Torah is to show that the truest reality of existence, which feels as if it is independent, is that it is actually only capable to feel independent because it is one with the Eibishter, who is truly independent. The only reason the world can feel like it exists is because it is one with the Eibishter, who taka exists. So, usually what is the cause for conflict? The Eibishter wants certain things, and I feel that I exist. The world feels that it exists. And that's where the conflict arises from. Torah comes to show that's not a source for conflict, that's a source for being aligned with what Hashem wants. The only reason you feel you exist is because you're connected to the Eibishter, who truly exists. When you recognize that, obviously you're not going to do anything but what the Eibishter wants, because you can't be anything but what the Eibishter wants. The world, which is given its name to represent the concealment that it has, if it's left to its own devices, obscures godliness. You don't see godliness in the world. In fact, what you actually see is the world appears to be a completely independent reality. That means that it's possible not only to believe that our world is not necessarily godliness, it's possible to believe that our world exists independently of the Eibishter's input. It's possible to believe that the world is disconnected from the Eibishter, as the expression in the Medrash goes, this is a city without a leader. Is given as sin as Torah because the default state of the world is to sometimes believe that there is no connection to the Eibishter, and that it's completely independent and left up to chance and natural cycles. Therefore, the Torah was given to create peace between the world and its creator, the Eibishter. Which means that it should be detectable and felt. Not only to feel that the world is not at loggerheads with the Eibishter, and not even just to realize that the world is completely reliant on Hashem at every single moment to exist. The goal of Torah is to illustrate to the world, you are Elikus. There is nothing else but Elikus. You have to recognize your truth. And then obviously you'll align with whatever the Eibishter wants, and that's Shalom. Therefore, even though in Torah mitzvahs, as we've identified, there are those two approaches, two channels, chiyuv, on the one hand, the positive approach, to bring more godliness and light into the world, on the one hand, on the other. On the other hand, there's the getting rid of the obstacles and obstructions to godliness. So even though there are two valid approaches, ultimately the goal of the entire Torah, which means even both channels, is Shalom. Which is to expose the truth of what the world is. The world is Elikus. The only way you can achieve that is by removing the falsehood of the world. The falsehood of the world is that it appears to conceal godliness. By removing the negative, which is the theme of Shalom, removing the obstacles that you don't bump into the walls on Shabbos. That illustrates the truth that the world is all godliness. That is something very closely related to the whole theme of Chanukah as mentioned, which is the Nitzachon von Eden und der Bittul HaMatzah von Gozl Gzeres Sal Yisrael Bottel Dosam V'lo Nichoisem Lasik B'Torah Mitzvahs. What was the whole story of Chanukah? Exactly that. Here's a force that claims to be independent of the Eibishter and therefore can obstruct Torah mitzvahs, and we got rid of them. Is gekommen durch dem, was die Chashmonaim haben yom sich moise nefesh gewen al kiddush Hashem. How did we get rid of them? Because the Chashmonaim at that time were willing to sacrifice their lives and everything else for the Eibishter. In order to do that means they access the very deep level of themselves. The capacity for that degree of sacrifice draws on the Yechida Shebenefesh, the deepest part of the soul. Und das ist die Darga von welches kommt damit ist in den Shalom. The Yechida Shebenefesh is from where a person can actually activate true Shalom. As because that's the part of ourselves that doesn't tolerate the possibility of anything that's an obstacle to the Eibishter. As the Mitler explains in great detail. And because they had gone through their personal avodah of getting in touch with the dimension of themselves that says there is nothing other than God, therefore nothing can obstruct godliness, that translated into what happened in their world. As they were able to get rid of their enemies and retain Jewish leadership and sovereignty, which means they practically had shalom in their world. That's the message of Chanukah. That's the message of Torah. Not to fight our enemies, but to get in touch with a level where you recognize the enemy cannot exist because there's only a likus, and naturally that swings the enemy around or obliterates the enemy. Von Kol Anal, on a practical level, knowing of course that even on Chanukah Shabbos candles take precedence, is verstandig azay b'chol hashana kula darf sein a greise shtadlus in the mitzvah von adlokas ner Shabbos kodesh. Definitely, if all year round we have to put tremendous effort to encourage women and girls to light Shabbos candles. That every girl, even before she's married and as soon as she's old enough to be educated from 3 years old, if every Shabbos we're supposed to encourage every girl to light Shabbos candles, as the Rebbe spoke many times, is it's extra relevant on Chanukah. As we should use the time of Chanukah with the best opportunity we can. Not only to share the mitzvahim of Chanukah, which is obvious, but also to encourage people to light Shabbos candles. And that should empower us even better to go into the days that follow Chanukah as well, obviously to continue the same. When we bring together all these mitzvah lights, Shabbos and Chanukah lights, Veritas and Avuka Gedola will make a massive flame, which will totally illuminate the darkness of the Golus in which we find ourselves. And bring the Gula with Mashiach, when we'll actually see real peace, both in terms of elikus and in terms of practicality in our world. As the Rambam says, there will be a world without hunger, without war, without jealousy, without competition. For Mashiach, because Mashiach will succeed in getting the whole world on side to be able to serve the Eibishter together. And then, like the pasuk says, that then everybody will serve the Eibishter together in one voice. And we'll be able to fulfill what the Medrash says, that if you light Shabbos candles, the Eibishter will show you the lights of Tzion, the Adlokas HaNeris in Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, the lighting of the Menorah in the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, which should happen in Mitzvah Hashem Teikef Umiyad Mamash.